Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Here we are wrapping up what will be probably our final theme month of horror in space.
Maybe. Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off for your longest one yet. I know you had that planned.
That's okay. In space, no one can hear you be stupid.
One of our friends, Neil, recommended another go to space movie, Cloverfield in space, I think.
That's true. And then somebody I think can't remember the name, I believe on YouTube or Instagram, I'm not sure which, had said that we really missed the boat on Amityville in space.
Oh, God, no, I can't.
I don't think I can either. I went and I looked at that and I was like, oh my goodness, no, this is not. I mean, we do some pretty bad shit, but
yeah, no, I can't.
I don't know if we've ever stooped to that level. Yeah,
no, I can't. But the Cloverfield in space, that movie was polarizing, and I actually liked it a little bit. So maybe someday, but not yet, because what we are finally getting to in our in space series is Jason in Space.
Yeah.
And it's Jason X from 2001. And when you announced this month, I was excited about it. And then we watched Critters and Leprechaun. And I was just like, both of them just like ruined my whole weekend. Like, oh, so terrible. They're so awful. I hate them so bad. Now I have to get on the internet and talk about them.
Hellraiser redeemed it, I thought. I really liked Hellraiser Bloodline.
Yeah, Pinhead in Space, I did too. And I've been telling you all along, like, I think you're going to like Jason X. If I remember it correctly, I think you're going to enjoy it. I think it's fun. But I hadn't seen it in a really long time. And when I had seen it, the most recently, it had only been in clips. Like years ago when I still had cable, you know, I would flip around and it would just be on sci-fi or something. Mm-hmm. And I would catch, 20, 30 minutes of it or whatever. And I remembered thinking it was fun. I haven't watched it in its entirety since, God, who knows? Probably since it came out. And I think I saw this in the theater. Pretty sure.
Yeah, you would have been in college.
2001. Yeah. No, college. Mm-hmm. But this is something that I would have gone to with my dad. Freddy, Jason, these things that have a long history. I'm pretty sure I saw this in the theater with my dad. Don't remember what my reaction to it was at the time. If I had to guess, I would guess that my reaction was probably kind of lukewarm at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Going back and watching it now, I loved it.
You're coming at it from a different place now. You're an older, wiser Craig, I suppose.
Yep. I loved it.
You've also had Leprechaun in Space and Critters 4 in Space in your past as well.
Which were so bad. Bad that I wanted to, like, harm myself.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been, I don't remember. I feel like you and I took a week off. It's been a minute since I talked to you. And we recorded those like back to back to back. And they were so bad that they just kind of made me angry. And then watching this one, I thought, this is what all of them were trying to be.
Right.
But this one got it right.
Yeah, they kind of did. Because, this movie has a bit of a storied history. It was in development. Well, I won't say it was in development hell. Basically, Freddy versus Jason was in development hell for quite some time. And
right.
Sean Cunningham was really planning on that being the next in the franchise, but they just couldn't get it going. And I think 6 or 7 years went by. And eventually, like, look, we just need to do another Jason movie.
Yeah, I think that they were concerned about keeping him relevant. Like, it had been a while since he'd been on the screen, so...
Since he went to hell.
and you're right. It was, yeah. Well, and that was a big departure, and that was... People were divided on that movie because in that movie, Jason became a body hopper, like whatever was inside him.
God, I haven't seen it.
No, it's interesting. Jason is
He's like a parasite.
Yeah, he's like a parasite, and he jumps into different people, and then these different people do his bidding. It was very polarizing. But they knew at the end, New Line, we could talk about the story of Friday the 13th for hours because it is so convoluted.
Yeah, it's long and storied.
But basically, Paramount was holding on to the rights forever, but they weren't really particularly interested in the property. The same thing happened with Hellraiser. The studio that owned Hellraiser wasn't particularly interested in the property, but they didn't want to lose the rights to it, so they had to keep putting out movies every few years. I think Jason Goes to Hell was the first one that was done by New Line. At the very end of Jason Goes to Hell, because New Line did it, I think, they were able to have Freddy's glove come up out of the ground and pull the mask down into the ground, Jason's mask.
Yeah, to tease the Freddy versus Jason.
Right, so to tease the Freddy versus Jason. But they couldn't get Freddy versus Jason off the ground. There were a bunch of different scripts over, a decade, and they just couldn't get it off the ground. So, like you said, they decided to do this one, but they thought, we can't with Freddy versus Jason. Like, we know that's coming.
Yeah.
We can't mess with it. So let's set it way in the future. So then it doesn't matter. And I also think that that's brilliant. I've mentioned it before with the other movies that we talked about. Set it way in the future. Then it doesn't matter. Like, you can continue making sequels that happened before this. And this one works in that way too.
I also saw that they were batting around a lot of different ideas, like Jason goes up north. He was going to be in the snow. Hell freezes over or something. NASCAR. They basically, Todd Farmer, who wrote the script. I know. Can you believe that? What would that be? Jason, drives around in a circle, slashing people as he goes by? I just don't see how that would work. But they said nothing was literally off the table. And Todd Farmer, the guy who had been, basically a script doctor for quite some time for Sean Cunningham, just doctoring up scripts, writing spec scripts, whatever he did. This was his big chance at writing a movie. He gave it to him and said, go to town with it. And apparently he had a lot of fun putting it together. He finally pitched them on In Space. They thought it was a great idea.
Well, they were hesitant because space is where these franchises go to die.
Yeah, it's where they jump the shark.
Yeah, they specifically thought of Critters and Leprechaun and Hellraiser, which had all come out before this, I believe. But they thought, no, let's do it. We've got a good idea. Let's throw a big budget at it, 3 times the budget of any other, of the most expensive Friday the 13th that had happened. 3 times that budget.
Oh, yeah.
Let's throw it at it and see what happens. And I'm sure that budget has a lot to do with it. I don't know. Budget certainly has a lot to do with it. But this, in my very humble podcaster opinion, is the best Friday the 13th movie. I just think it's great. In contention with Freddy versus Jason, but I don't know. This might even be more fun than that. I don't know.
I think you're more qualified to speak on that. I did try to do a Jason marathon for One Crazy October around Halloween time, and I just kind of had to give up around the 5th one, I think.
They're all the same.
They are so all the same. And so, there is just a formula, and they are just cheap. Like, they are put out cheaply.
Very cheap.
$3 million, and then they go off and they make gold. Because people want the formula, they just want to see it. And to me, Jason is all about creative kills and a bit of suspense.
Creative, I guess, but
they're not that creative. I mean,
no, in the earlier movies, he had his machete. He's always had his machete, and then other things that you would find around a camp, like a bow and arrow or a kitchen knife.
Yeah,
I like the Jason movies. I really do. They are the perfect. Back when I had cable, networks like USA and Sci-Fi would always, without fail, on Friday the 13th, run marathons of the movies. And I loved that. I could put that on all day. I could
Yeah.
go about my day doing whatever I was doing, and Friday the 13th was just on in the background. And I haven't, I couldn't tell you, like I've seen all those kills. I couldn't tell you what movie they were from. Who
Right.
cares? It's all the same.
It's all the same. There's no like great stories in any of them. No memorable characters in any of them. It's just the same thing over and over again. It's like junk food.
Yeah, it's junk food.
You can pop it in, it goes down easy. And so for
Right.
that, I can appreciate them. But one of the hallmarks of the series I think of is that there's at least a bit of suspense. There's that moment where the camper goes out by themselves and you're like, no, don't do that. Or that moment when they're skinny dipping and then suddenly you see a POV from the bushes and you're just kind of wondering when it's going to happen, and the music and the comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like this movie deviated from that a little bit because it was in space, and I don't know what to say. Like, no, I didn't dislike this movie at all. Honestly, this is one of my favorites that we've done this month. This one, I really liked Hellraiser too. I kind of actually put that a notch or two above this, but they're really different kinds of movies. So it's really hard to compare the two. This one, as I was saying, Todd Farmer really just wanted to have a lot of fun with it. He wanted to be jokey. He had a quirky sense of humor, apparently, in the original script. And what ended up happening, and he played Dallas in this movie, by the way. What ended up happening throughout the process is it just got torn apart. His original script got rewritten like 100 times, and to the point where they were shooting this movie without a finalized script. There were times when they were in the middle of a scene and the director would say, what do you guys think we should do? And they were rewriting things. And this after having had a really long rehearsal time going into it. I think they rehearsed for like half a year. It was a big process of frustration for everybody involved. And everyone involved in the production has something to say about how they were a little disappointed in how that original script that they were really enthusiastic about in the beginning just got meddled with so much, but still enjoyed the process of shooting the movie and enjoyed the ability to contribute to it, because that's one thing that the director, Jim Isaacs, really did actually do, and that was allow them a lot of creativity and input in the film. And some might say a little too much. Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff I read.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see. Because Todd Farmer was like, the humor that ends up in the movie was just a little bit cornier than his sensibility.
Yeah.
Anyway. But yeah, this is what we have, and this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, from what I've read, and I've watched some interviews and things, there are documentaries. There's like a 6-hour documentary. Remind me the title. I don't remember.
Well, there's a book. Maybe the documentary comes off the book. Crystal Lake Memories is a pretty thick kind of coffee table book that just interviews everybody involved in every single production. It's a wonderful book, and it's a lot of fun if you're a fan of this series. It goes into greater detail than anything you could imagine.
Right.
And the e-version of it goes even deeper, because it strips out a lot of the photos, and because it can be as long as it wants, the writer put in a whole bunch of stuff that he had to take out of the original edition. So you should catch it in the e-version if you don't mind not seeing all the beautiful pictures and you want to hear more depth stories and stuff.
I didn't know that it was a book. There is a filmed documentary of the same name and tons of interviews, and it sounds like everybody who is involved in this had a wonderful time. Like, it just seemed like they had a great time. You're right, they said the original script was darker. Okay, fine. At some point, this came right after the grand success of Scream.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of rewrites that pushed it more into meta comedy. Like, we're very self-aware of the situation in the movie that we're in, and we're going to be cracking jokes. I have no idea what the original would have been like. I agree with you. I would like to see what the original vision was for it. I love what it is. I actually think that this was the absolute right direction to go. Jason has been around forever. His mythos is known.
Yeah.
let's
shoot him off into space and just play with him.
yeah, and let's be a little bit self-referential. Let's throw in some jokes. I loved it.
Sure.
You know, it's a cast of mostly young people, but it doesn't feel exactly like the same formula.
No. It feels more like a more modern update in a way, right? A lot of beautiful, very good-looking young people in very slick circumstances.
Yes. I think the thing that I liked the most about this movie is that it is a perfectly serviceable sci-fi space movie with Jason.
Yeah.
It just works for me. Like, I wish that I could have said that about any of the movies that we've watched up until now, but this one just works for me. Freeze Jason in time in 2008 and then wake him up on a space station where only one person knows what he's actually capable of, and of course everybody else isn't concerned. You know, this is some weirdo cryogenic space thing that we are not even trying to bring back to life. Like, they're not concerned. And then it does become a chop up the people movie.
Yeah.
It's not different. I wish that horror franchises could find a different formula than just put our villain in space and make him the
alien.
Yeah, the xenomorph. That's the word I was trying to come up with. Just put our villain in space and make him the xenomorph. And I understand it. I feel like it's budgetary. We have to do it on a ship because we can't do it on an entire alien planet. That would be far too expensive. So we confine it to a confined space for budgetary reasons. I get it. And so I get why all of these movies kind of feel the same way in that way. For whatever reason, it just, for me, worked with Jason. I just believed that Jason woke up in this environment and kept on going about his business.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I think that's evidenced by the fact that he just kind of pops out and hacks somebody. I mean, it's what he does in the other movies.
Well, but we're not even... We're 20 minutes in and we haven't even started talking about the plot, but one of the things that I love about it is, you know, Jason in the early part of the movie gets cryogenically frozen, and then he kind of starts to thaw out when he gets rescued 400 years later or whatever. But it's only when young unmarried people start that he sits bolt right in bed. Like, oh, no. Not on my watch.
They did throw that in there. And we have a bunch of young people. These are, students on a class trip? Is that what this is? I couldn't quite figure it out. But they're supposed to be mostly teenagers on this ship, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, it's kind of impossible to tell by looking at them, but...
Can I do the cold open real quick?
Please.
Okay, so we open with what looks like hell, I guess. Like, it's a lot of weird CGI hell stuff and chanting. And then we get just snips of a doctor, like, sewing things together or whatever. And I think that this is supposed to bridge us from Jason Goes to Hell to now. Like, somehow...
He's back out of hell.
He's back out of hell. A doctor has put him back together, and he's alive, apparently, and they have him chained up kind of like Hannibal Lecter, like in the middle of a huge room with just spotlights on him.
Like in a warehouse.
He's chained up in the middle of the room, but he's very much alive and awake, and he's staring at this guy who's watching him, and the guy walks up and throws a blanket over him and says, "Stare at this for a while." And then the main woman of our story, Rowan, she comes out to meet, I just have in my note, bureaucrat, but it's...
David Cronenberg, you mean?
David Cronenberg.
Yeah, the director, but he did do a few acting bits in movies, some cameos. It's so recognizable.
Oh my God, the fame. I mean, I wouldn't recognize them by sight, but David Cronenberg, are you kidding me? Like, and it's also just so cool that he was involved, and he accepted the role. He did it, but he wanted to be involved in it. Like, he was involved in some rewrites, and I don't know, he was a fan of it, and I think that's really cool. But anyway, he shows up and like Rowan says,
"What are you doing here?"
"I'm taking the specimen."
"Well, you can't. I haven't prepped the cryostasis chamber."
"I don't want them frozen, Rowan. I want them soft."
It's a great line. Good job, David Cronenberg. But again, it just comes down to the same thing that we saw in Critters, and they want a weapon.
Yeah.
This is a being that can regenerate, that never dies and that regenerates.
Needs to be researched, needs to be studied for military use in the future. Yeah, so we can regenerate our troops.
But ultimately, it doesn't really matter because we find out that Jason got out by himself anyway. He did a bait and switch and put that guard under his blanket and chained up in the chains. And he's out and he kills all of them, including David Cronenberg. Then Rowan masterfully tricks him and gets him into the cryogenic freezer or whatever, and she thinks that she's won, but he stabs his machete through the metal door and through her, which releases the nitrogen gas or whatever it is and freezes them both. Now, I'm fine with this as a device to freeze them both. I suppose I will have to say that about probably many things that happen in this movie, but that doesn't make any sense. There is no way that machete would have just bent, on the inside. There's no way that it busted through that metal door in through her.
It's just part of the joke, right? I mean, and I kind of like how it sets that up from the very beginning. Like, Jason just gets his way every single time until the end, which isn't going to be the end because he's going to be in another movie. He's going to get his way all over again. I just thought that was hilarious that there was this sort of final FU moment where he's, all right, well, I guess I'm in cryostasis, but before I do go, I'm going to kill this woman, and this big metal door that is 10 inches thick isn't going to stop me. It's just funny.
It's hilarious, but I also have in my notes in bold, because I wanted to say something about it, that so far, all of this looks fantastic.
Yeah.
They're running through hallways in I don't know, it's not a spaceship at this point. It just looks so good. And I'm sure that I'm influenced by the things that we've seen up till now.
Yeah.
That looked so bad. But I was just watching this and thinking, holy shit, this is a Friday the 13th movie. This looks fantastic. It looks so good.
It really looks slick. Now, they were able to shoot it up in Canada, so, their money went a lot further up that way. And most of the money that they put into the movie went up onto the screen. They didn't cast any name actors. In fact, part of the reason they went to cast all those Canadian actors is because most of them were non-SAG, and so they didn't have to pay them residuals. They could just buy them out on the movie. The movie also has the distinction of being the very first film that was shot in 35 millimeter, scanned into high def digitally, and then had the visual effects added to it, and then turned right back around and made it back onto a 35 millimeter print, which I think it was kind of a new technique at the time, and it shows. They said that, the movie looks so good because we were able to play around and do these kind of visual effects that at the time looked really, really impressive. And by the time it was released 2 years later, because New Line just let it sit on the shelf for a while, much to their detriment, then the effects already looked old. So that was probably another reason why it didn't do so well at the movie. But very ambitious in the lighting. They had a huge crew of like 80 plus people working on here, all master craftsmen, all really allowed to just play around and do what they do. Again, like we said before, everyone, including the crew, loved working on this movie because they really felt they had a chance to play. And it shows. I think it shows on the screen. The lighting is so great. One of the lighting guy was interviewed in that book, and he said what was so cool about having this space set to work with was, on the one hand, we had these shadows, so that Jason could be coming out and in shadow or half in shadow or sleeking back into the shadows. But a woman could walk into the same room and she could just step into kind of a different light and have a more soft, flattering light on her. You can just do all these different things up in space. And I feel like this movie, more than any of the ones we saw previously, really used that atmosphere to its advantage and made it look much, much bigger than its budget actually was. It looks like a really big movie.
The budget was, as I said before, much larger than it had been on any of the previous films,
But it's still a low budget for a movie like this that's trying to compete
with 15 million. I mean, for a space movie, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. But I don't want to say Cronenberg loaned some of his crew. You know, these people make their own decisions, but some of Cronenberg's crew worked on this because he was behind it. You mentioned that it sat on the shelf. I'm surprised that I don't remember that because I have been a horror fanatic my entire life. I was always very excited when new entries in Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th were coming out. I remember being excited about this, and I remember seeing the posters with, you know, the half Jason regular that were accustomed to and the half like Jason X or Turbo Jason or whatever you want to call him, and I was really excited about it. And I guess that it just must have been before I had regular access to the internet, because I didn't realize that it had been filmed in 2000, I believe, and wasn't released in the United States until 2002, and it had been released in Europe a year before that, and apparently it had been leaked to the internet before it released here.
Yeah, people were watching it.
Which may account for why it did so poorly, because hardcore fans who would typically pay money to go see it in the theater had already seen it.
Yeah.
Because it had been leaked on the internet. I didn't know that. I feel like we could talk about this for days. Okay, so, you know, all of that pre-stuff happened that we talked about, and then they get picked, again, very much like Alien. I feel like they get picked up by like a trolling ship or like a scavenger ship or something. It's a bunch of students, which is convenient because they can be a lot of young, hot people. Mm-hmm. They're on some kind of like archaeological exploration or something.
Do you mean they're exploring the abandoned Crystal Lake Research Facility?
Oh, no. That's in the beginning.
Yeah, but that's what they find.
That is what they are exploring. You're right.
Right. But that's
because I guess that the abandoned Crystal Lake Research Facility is on Earth, which has become uninhabitable.
Yeah.
So are these people just coming? I don't know if they're coming to scavenge or just archaeology or whatever.
They're research students. They've got their professor, Brandon Lau, his companion, who's an android. He's got an intern, and then the rest of them are all students. It's a field trip to Earth because it's 2455, and Earth is
400 years
polluted.
later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bunch of young, sexy people. You said something about the acting before. You know, the director or whoever was concerned about the acting. Like, they did rehearsals. Like, nobody does rehearsals for this. No, you don't rehearse these movies. No.
You don't have time, yeah.
You shoot these movies. And if you have the luxury of doing a few shots per scene, great. But you don't even necessarily have that luxury. You certainly don't rehearse these movies. But they did. They were concerned about the acting. And I think the acting was fine.
Yeah.
In all caps. Like, all caps, fine.
Better than most of the series, let's put it that way. Where
absolutely. Like, nobody's going to win any awards for their performances in this movie, but I enjoyed everybody. It's not a problem. I didn't have a problem with it because as a viewer, I don't really care. As a podcaster who feels like they need to keep track of things.
It's 1 million people.
There are so many people.
I know. God, I can't even begin. Like, I lost track of who was who and who was hooking up with who and why it mattered, and I don't think it does really.
No, it doesn't. And there were 3 brunettes that were almost indistinguishable from one another.
Exactly.
So I don't think that we should get I don't think we should get caught up in that. What I
No.
think we should get caught up in are the really good things, because there are so many great things in this movie. Okay, so they bring Jason and Ronan, or whatever her name is,
Rowan,
on the ship, and they say, yeah, we can save her with the technology that we have. They're really just more interested in Jason. He's a humanoid. They recognize him as a humanoid, and he's totally dead. They don't have any plans with him, really, but they bring him on the ship anyway. They do bring Rowan back to life.
like Ripley, immediately warns them.
Did you get him? Where is he? Tell me about him.
Got who?
No one's here. You're safe with us.
There's a leak in the cryo unit, and was it contained?
It was contained. But when the cryo unit ruptured, you didn't escape it. It put you into stasis.
I love that the way that they bring her back and the technology that they use throughout this movie is nanotechnology.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we don't hear as much about nanotechnology as we did 5 years ago. I feel like nanotechnology was the wave of the future, and I haven't heard that much about it lately.
It's still pretty badass, but it's getting eclipsed by AI these days, yeah.
Yeah, it is very cool. Like these, they call them ants, but these tiny little robots. I don't know.
Nanobots.
They're so tiny as to not even be visible. They're only visible when you see them in mass. They almost move like liquid. And they cover her wound and they heal her, and she's alive and she's fine. And like you said, she warns them. But they all go off and, there's a lot of plot that we could talk about. It's not really all that important. They leave Jason with this beautiful blonde girl, Adrian, and she's supposed to kind of research him or whatever, but the assistants that they leave her with are these horny teenagers. And they're so horny that they can't keep their hands off of each other, and so she's like, would you just get out of here and already and then come back when you're done?
That was hilarious. And they're like, really? Oh, okay, cool, thanks.
Okay.
And that's what they do. But I'm very confused by this scene because she starts to poke and prod at him, and it looks like she pulls out his eyeball.
I think that was supposed to be his brain, because they did a scan of him and they made a point of talking about how could anybody that size function with such a tiny brain?
Would she do it like lobotomy-wise or something?
Well, through his eye? Like, I have no idea. Like, I just thought that was a weird line. What are they implying? Why does he have a tiny brain?
It's weird, yeah. I mean, he's a supernatural creature. He was a kid. Maybe it's a child's brain inside an adult's body. Who knows?
But what she pulls out is the size of a
eyeball
cashew. Like,
it looks like an eyeball to me, and it's white and it's goopy.
It looks like a deflated eyeball.
Yeah, I thought, she pulled out his eye, but she didn't, because we see both of his eyes throughout the whole movie. But anyway,
I was trying to get to. All right, I'm just going to get to it now. What I consider the best kill, though I think that lots of these kills are fantastic. The best kill is the first one, where those horny people that she just sent away are f***ing, and them doing that wakes him up.
yeah,
Like he
sits straight up.
Yeah, so he sits straight up. And then he kills Adrian. And the way that he kills her is he just, she doesn't know he's awake or whatever. And he's just behind her and he grabs her and she screams and he dips her face into a vat of, I guess, liquid nitrogen, which immediately freezes her entire face. And then he smashes it on a counter and it shatters.
It looks great.
It's so good. It's so good. I watched, I didn't watch the 6-hour documentary about it, but I watched the 45 minutes about this movie. And she said that there were like 10 prosthetic heads made of her. She said it was really eerie seeing, but everybody was really proud of that effect. And she said that what she had to do was Kane Hodder put her face, well, whoever was doing it, put her face in the water, and she had to scream for a few seconds and then just stop and be motionless so that they could put the CGI on later.
Yeah, like the icicles suddenly freezing her.
And she said it looked really great, but the other thing that she said was all of them, everybody said that Kane Hodder was just professional. He was just amazing to work with. He worked so hard with her on the choreography of this scene to make sure that she felt safe. And she said that she 100% did. Everybody that spoke about this movie in that documentary just went on and on about how wonderful Kane Hodder was. And listening to him talk about it, he really, like, these roles can be, and sometimes are, played by stunt people who aren't necessarily actors. And I'm not criticizing them. You know, they do their job and they do it well.
Sure.
But Kane Hodder wanted to put character into Jason. He played him 4 times. He did a lot with the eyes, and he did a lot. Kane Hodder's Jason does a lot with breathing. He does a lot of heavy breathing where
you can see the chest move. Yeah.
Right. And you see that here too. It's shocking to me that I feel the need to compliment somebody in a role like this, but he's great. He's fantastic.
Yeah, he is.
He does such a good job.
You probably see more of his character in this movie than, I mean, again, you're probably more the expert in it, but I feel like he has more opportunity to shine in this. You know?
I think so.
He's on screen a little longer. He's a little more lit. You certainly see his eyes a lot more, especially later when he kind of transforms, and we can talk about that later. But also, apparently, the MPAA, just as a side note, didn't really have many problems with this movie. They, in their phone call to them, they were one of the production guys that had to handle the phone call, they were thinking the worst, because Sean Cunningham has, from the very beginning, had a very tumultuous relationship with them, said that, you know, they were like, you know what, we think you got a really fun film here. And they had a very, very few cuts. And one of the cuts that they wanted them to make was to make this liquid nitrogen smashing thing different. And they said, ironically, like, when we cut it, it actually looked a lot better. The final product.
Yeah, I read that they only had to cut like less than a couple minutes, maybe even less than that. They didn't have to cut very much at all.
Far less than any other episode in the series.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, God, we've already been talking about it for so long. The thing that I liked about this entry is that it is so different from the previous entries in that it feels so ambitious. Like the other entries, I enjoy them all. I really do. I mean, after part 3, they leaned into the camp and there was a lot more humor and a lot more campiness. And there's humor in this movie too, but this one just feels so much more ambitious. As I said before, I just think for many reasons, including the fact that this movie is chock full of great fun kills, it just stands ahead, above all of the other ones. Like, I love the first one. I love it. I love the second one. I love it. Like, they hold special places in my heart. But I was watching this movie, and I just so desperately wished that you and I had been able to watch it together. Because
it would have been a lot of fun.
It's so fun. It's just a fun movie.
Yeah.
And now, you know, at this point, we're left with Jason let loose on this spaceship. And basically for the next, 45 minutes, he just goes on a killing spree. Like, he kills the horny guy, and he kills everybody.
Yeah, like he does.
Literally tens of thousands of people
End up getting killed, yeah. There's a nice balance of humor without it getting super campy like we've seen the other space ones going. I was really impressed how they were able to introduce the typical space themes like liquid nitrogen. My God. Okay, so now we know that you can't have an outer space movie without liquid nitrogen being involved somehow. Then, they do the holodeck bit. Dallas and the other kid are shooting each other on the holodeck, and there's a bit of a fake out there where you think one of them gets killed, but it turns out that they're actually playing around. They're shooting. It's all fake.
Yeah, it's VR. I love that scene.
It's so good, that scene.
I love that scene. Two soldiers, you don't know right away, but they're playing like a VR simulation, and you see these giant monsters, and I thought that this was brilliant.
It was.
That they introduced these huge monsters that look CGI. They don't look great.
Yeah.
But then you realize that they're a part of this VR experience that they're playing. So they shouldn't look that great. I thought that was such an excellent way of using the effects that you have, acknowledging that they're limited, but there's an explanation for why they're limited. And despite the fact that they were limited, they still looked really good.
Yeah. Yeah, he bashes the Dallas's skull in. He breaks Azrael's back. God, that really hurt.
There are so many great kills. There's one guy, Bronsky, who gets killed several times, but still is alive at the end of the movie.
Yes.
There's a kill where a soldier gets thrown off a catwalk onto a giant drill bit, and then his body just slowly spins down. That's brilliant. Brilliant.
It's really smart.
And it looks fantastic.
Sarge, we found Condor.
What's his condition?
He's screwed.
Gosh.
Well, he kills the pilot. And see, this is how I felt about it. I didn't feel suspense. I was just watching it for a ride. Do I ever feel suspense in a Friday the 13th movie? I'm not quite sure. But my point I was trying to make at the very beginning of this was I feel like the earlier movies really make an effort to build suspense. This movie has so many people and so much going on in such a small space that it's just like, here are these people, and then suddenly Jason pops out and dispatches them. It's more of that. For that, I can see why people might have been a little disappointed in it when it came out. For that reason, it just doesn't have the build up to every kill that I expect in the series. I don't know.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I'm misremembering it.
I disagree, because in the previous ones the formula was pretty much the same. These kids are at a camp, and it's early 20-somethings or late teens or whatever, and he just goes around picking them off one by one. I actually kind of liked the claustrophobic atmosphere of this one, because it felt like Jason didn't have to do anything. They just kept coming to him.
Yeah,
like
true.
he would just stand in a dark corner, and somebody would eventually back into him, and he could just cut their throat. And I kind of liked some of those quieter moments. There was that moment where somebody just backed to him and he cut their throat. And there was another moment, I think, where somebody just kind of bumped into him in the dark, and he grabbed the man's head and slowly, like, he didn't crack it real fast. Like, he twisted it slowly. So it was like crack, 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 crack.
Yeah.
And I liked that. I mean, ultimately, plot-wise, is it really all that different from the other movies? No, it's still about picking off a bunch of kids, but
it's more interesting environment, I think, with more interesting stuff to do.
Yeah, it's in a more interesting environment. You've got more interesting characters. You've got more interesting dynamic. It's not just camp counselors. You've got this general guy who is a leader. You've also got KM, who we haven't mentioned at all, who's an android, who is very tough and a strong adversary for Jason. And another thing that's different is that in the Friday the 13th movies, typically they don't even realize that people are getting killed until very late in the movie.
Yeah.
In this, they know that Jason's out there very early on.
They can't help but know.
The only other thing that's very different about this movie is because it was made in 2001, post Scream, it's not as meta as Scream, but it still throws in a lot of the meta jokes. And that works for me. Like, I'm down with it,
Yeah.
especially this far into a popular but, to be honest, fairly mediocre franchise. Do it. Try something new, throw the meta at it, go for it. I am down.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that makes this feel really fresh is that, unlike the previous episodes, these are people with resources and tech and know-how. These are not just kids at a camp in the dark. You know, this is a sophisticated operation, and everybody's got a job. There's an android in here. They should be able to just seal the doors, you know, or something like that, and it would stop him. You know, he's not an alien who's like slinking through the air vents, but it doesn't matter. Like, he kills, like you said, tens of thousands of people by killing the pilot, who they're trying to dock at this space station, this huge space station. And when he kills the pilot, this ship veers off course, kind of leans on the controls like a boat smashing into the dock, smashes right through this improbably glass dome, but it was okay, that's fine, of this space station, and goes right through it in slow motion. And when they get past it, they're like, all right, well, we got to turn around and go back. And they look in the window, and the whole thing is just exploding to nothing.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. It's the point where they're like, oh man, now we're totally screwed, right? That was our hope. And it's a comedy at the same time. And it's just so hilarious that Jason managed to kill so many people with one swipe.
Right.
You know?
But again, I would just emphasize that this is a perfectly serviceable early 2000s space sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
That Jason happens to be in. I'm not gonna, it's not today level quality, but it looks good.
It looks really good. It looks better than all the other movies.
Especially compared to the ColecoVision that we saw in Leprechaun. It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Jason has to take out basically an entire squadron of military people, which he does very quickly. But then it comes down to the last few people, including our main girl and the android, and he shows up and the android's like, well, let me take a shot at him, because her builder / lover, and we're leaving out so much. I love when the android wants boobs and he gives her boobs, but then the nipples pop off.
That's really funny.
There are so many good things about this movie that we're skipping. You guys, watch this. If you haven't seen it, it's so good. If you've only seen like 1 or 2 Friday the 13th movies and you thought they were pretty stupid, watch this anyway. It's so good. But he upgrades her, so she's kind of, I don't know, Linda Hamilton badass or whatever with big guns, and she kills Jason. She blows off his arm, she blows off his leg, she blows off his head. Unfortunately, she blows him away right onto the lab table.
Mm-hmm.
And
they just walk away.
After they walk out of the room, the electricity starts shorting and the computer comes on and reconstructs him with the nanotechnology. And there's not enough biological material, so they use synthetic material. Then he comes back as Uber Jason, and Uber Jason is fucking awesome. I love it. I love the design.
It looks
Kane
good.
Hodder loved the design. He said it was really challenging because in his regular Jason costume, he could do anything. In the Uber Jason costume, his movement was severely limited. And so they can't do too much with him, but just his appearance. And he really doesn't do much. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I read Uber Jason kills nobody directly in this movie. He knocks the android's head off.
True.
But she's still alive because she's just an android, so her boyfriend carries the head around. One of the people that's still remaining, this cute young black guy whose name I can't remember.
Waylander?
Yes. A throwback to Alien, Wayland. He blows himself up in this passageway to disconnect part of the ship, and Jason is still in it. So he dies, but not by Jason's hand. Then, apparently, Jason was somehow able to grab onto the outside of the ship, and he punches a hole in the hull
of the ship
that then sucks Janessa out
throughout that tiny little hole.
Well, and even better, like, he punches the hole in the hull and the vacuum, effect starts, and she's holding on to the grated floor and asking for help, and they almost help her. But even better, then, before she gets sucked out, part of the grated floor gets pulled over the hole so that when she gets sucked out and says, "This sucks on so many levels." Not only does she get sucked out through the hole, but she has to get sucked out through that grate.
Yeah.
Now we only see the aftermath,
really,
so it's not all that exciting, but still fun and creative, and maybe a throwback to Alien 4, I think.
Then Rowan distracts him because he's on the holodeck or something, or they create a holographic version of Camp Crystal Lake. And Jason suddenly, for a moment, is very confused. He looks around and he walks forward, and there are two giggling girls sitting, laying down on sleeping bags. And they both pop up, and they take their tops off.
Hey, you want a beer?
Or do you want to smoke some pot?
Or we can have premarital sex.
We love premarital sex.
This 1 minute scene is worth the price of admission.
Yeah.
It is hilarious. They're like, what do we do? What do we do? Wait a second. Computer, look up records from 1980 Camp Crystal Lake. And then they project it. And it's so much fun.
It is
like
fun.
It's virtual reality Camp Crystal Lake, and I love that, like, it's virtual reality. So if you really, really look in the background, you can see the walls of the spaceship
Kind of crackling away. Yep.
the stairs. It's like VR and like AI in that it looks great, but it's imperfect.
Yeah.
Like the stairs of the cabins go down right directly into the water, and none of that matters. These are just background details.
But they're clever.
And I absolutely loved it. And it distracts him. He has a great time zipping those girls up in their sleeping bags and beating them against each other and beating them against a tree. In the documentary, it said that the original concept for that was they were going to be, those naked girls were going to be in the sleeping bags, and he was going to pick them both up and helicopter them around his head. But they couldn't figure it out.
Oh, God.
But if it was the director speaking, he said that ultimately he felt that it worked out better the way that it was. And I think that it was great too. Yeah, I mean, we're coming up to the end. Bronski has to spacewalk, go out into space in a suit. A rescue ship has arrived, but they can't get the rescue hatch open, so he has to go out to do that. They distract Jason, but then Jason's coming. Bronski gets the door open, and then he comes back and stays behind to face Jason while the others go. They, meaning the android head, her boyfriend, and the main lady, get away on this rescue ship, and they see the Grendel, which is the station they've been on, completely explode. But then, somehow, in the explosion, Jason has been propelled directly towards their window. And they're like, oh shit. But then Bronski, in his space suit, intercepts Jason and rides him down through the atmosphere of Earth 2, which is where they were going. And then we cut to a scene lakeside of two romantic teenagers, and they see a shooting star and think it's super romantic. And one of them says, "It landed in the lake. Let's go check it out." And then you see the burnt up metal mask of Uber Jason fall to the lake floor. They had originally considered that this might be a new like shoot off franchise. Like, let's take Friday the 13th into Jason X territory and just run with it. Well, the movie did terribly. I'm sure in large part because of the delay in its release, but it did terribly, and so that was lost. But they did continue it in a series of comics, which I haven't seen or read, but I would be interested in. I don't know. I just thought, gosh, man, I was excited about doing this month, and then honestly, I was disappointed. Hellraiser was fun. I liked it, but this one, God, I watched it by myself in the middle of the day on my computer, but I just thought it was so much fun. And the whole time I was watching it, I kept thinking, oh, Todd's going to love this. I can't wait to talk about it.
It was a lot of fun.
Maybe I overestimated it, and maybe I'm talking it up too much, but I just had so much fun rewatching it.
It was a blast, and I had never seen it before, and it was much, much better than I thought it would be. The corniness of it landed, and it wasn't as corny as the other ones we had seen and what I thought it was going to be. It looked good. The acting was fine. I said before that the suspense really wasn't there for me, but I don't really care about that.
Sure.
I was just looking to have a good time with it. And, who's going to take this seriously? And I was really pleasantly surprised. I really, really enjoyed it. And you're right. It would have been really fun to watch it together. So if you've got some friends out there, you want to watch this movie, gather them together and see it. And you probably will be surprised at how good it is. Actually, I think history has redeemed this movie. My understanding is that even though it flopped in the box office, it is by far the most financially successful of the franchise because it did so well on DVD and rentals and things afterwards.
Yep.
So I think that speaks for it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this trip into the cosmos. I don't know, maybe we'll do another space theme month later. We're certainly going to be covering more horror movies that take place in space. If you can think of some other ones that we haven't mentioned that we've missed, franchises that went to space, let us know in the comments. Let us know on our website. Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw Podcast, and you'll find us out there and all the social media. And let us know what you think. Let us know what you thought of this month. Let us know also what other movies and theme months you think we can do for the future. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.